So first order of business is to call the meeting to order. It's 8 o'clock. And the next thing is approve the meeting agenda. I need a motion.
So move.
I got two motions. Now you need a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right. We have no action items today. And we have one information item, and I think we'd like to go and start with that and welcome.
Well, thank you. Well, good morning. I'm going to kick things off and provide a little introduction. So welcome committee members. And I think we have a couple of board members online, so welcome online as well. We're here for this is the first Water Resource Committee meeting of 2024. And so I thought I'd just, start with a little bit of, refreshing and some background. We started this Water Resource Committee several years ago, maybe about 4 years ago, and really at the time realized there's a lot of activities, a lot of things we're doing that don't get to either CIP or Finance Committee that share a lot of things we're doing and sort of exposed to parts of our business that we don't get to oftentimes. So we change up the agenda. We have a lot of different topics that we've gone through and really had a lot of good discussion with Chair Bonfils and what these different topics are. But we're kind of settled in now. We think a couple of these meetings a year is kind of hitting it right. One in the first half, we'll have one more in the fall. And then sometimes different topics come up and there's an urgent need to kind of share information. So we have the ability to mix in some others if needed. So today's topic, as the chair mentioned, is our research program. And it really, there's a lot going on. So it really is able to fill the full agenda. A little refresher for those that were, been on the board. A year ago at the retreat in 2023, we talked a little bit about the research program. So a little bit of what we do. It's not just about information that we gather, but how we use it, how we use it strategically, looking at, of course, water quality and emerging contaminant issues, but also selecting treatment technologies, those kinds of things. So looking forward to the agenda today. Up at the table, we've got Pam Kennel, she's executive.
Is she new here?
Our executive director of water resources and planning, so has a lot of executive oversight of this program. Kendra and Jessica, and have been and are a big part of our operations teams and really get very involved in this program as well. And so we'll share some thoughts. I think new to you is probably Brad Schmitz. He's a senior scientist with us in our water resources program and really takes a kind of day-to-day lead in many of the activities here. So he's gonna kick things off and go through the development of the program and really where we are today and some really hot topics with the others chiming in as well. And so you'll hear this, but I just want to kind of emphasize some of the takeaways for today that you'll continue to hear. For the board members who've heard some of this before, we take a very proactive role, Loudoun Water does, and really, in many ways, are leaders in the region and have gotten so nationally as well. But part of the reason for that is that we've got great people and really know what we're doing in some of these areas, but also it maximizes what we get out of this by taking a lead role and being very proactive. It also allows us to really tailor the needs and influence into a lot of these programs that are very collaborative across the region and elsewhere to fit a lot of the needs that we have. We get great value out of this financially. Information really helps in our decision making, and you'll hear throughout this topic. Again, this is one of these very collaborative kind of initiatives that we do across many areas of the organization. So you'll continue to hear that. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Brad to start through the slides.
There we go. Can you guys hear me? There we go. All right. Thank you, Mark. And welcome, everyone. Excited to talk about this today. That's not moving. Oh. Go back. There we go. All right. So we already talked a little bit about the agenda, so this one will be quick, but we'll talk a little bit about what is utility research. It's slightly different than probably the normal research you would think in the top of your head. And then how we've tailored that kind of applied research mentality here at Loudon Water and build a structured program that benefits the organization. We'll give a little bit of an introduction on some of the major projects we've worked on in the last couple of years. And then we'll touch base on where we're going with this in the future and the value that we're currently getting. So just to kick it off, what is utility research? And traditionally, as you're probably very aware, utilities are face a lot of challenges regarding new contaminants, treatment, staffing and staffing development and retainment, new technologies, the management, lots of different challenges that in today's world need new kind of techniques and approaches to address them, specifically thinking things like PFAS and advanced treatment and those types of influences, especially recruiting and retaining young talent is a challenge in the utility world. And that's where research kind of comes in. And when we're talking research in a utility level, we're really talking about applied research, right? There's many different scales for research, but for utility-based research, it really comes down, and this is a definition from the Water Research Foundation, which is a research organization for the water industry, as well as the American Water Works Association, together formed this as being a systematic fact-gathering effort that acquires and applies knowledge to address a specific problem or need. And when we think of research, we most of the time think of kind of bench scale, right? Academics in a lab, moving pipettes and things like that. But the reality is there's many scales at the utility level. The first one being, of course, bench scale, where we do have to do initial testing to see if it fits our needs. The second is then taking some of the data we did on bench scale, going a little bit larger into a pilot scale, testing the pilot scale. And if data and results show that that's something that's promising, then going full scale demonstration at our full scale facilities, Trap Rock and Broad Run. So how does that fit within Loudon Water? Well, I'm going to walk you guys through a little bit of a timeline story for what we've done in the past, but where we are today. And Mark already addressed on it very well. Loudon Water is already kind of a really strong foundation for innovation research and being proactive. So when I joined the organization, there was already a lot of research being done. There's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of mindset about thinking proactively for where we want to go, whether you think of it as starting our own initiatives to get into the drinking water with Trap Rock, the reclaimed water system, even moving forward and looking into different reuse opportunities and storage and redundancy with the quarry and thinking about this all now as a whole one water mindset. But when I first joined the organization in 2018, most of the projects done at Loudon Water that were research focused were primarily only through the Water Research Foundation. And it was mostly independent departments kind of siloed, thinking, well, this is important to my department. This is something that we want to support. So they write a letter of recommendation, maybe put a little bit of cash to it, maybe a little bit of in-kind support for staff to be involved. And that was basically the end of it. They would be involved, and then there was no real way to capitalize on what they were getting out of that. A lot of the times results and reports would go unattained, right? There would be a letter of support saying we want some type of results that could help us for Loudon Water in 2 years at the end of the project. 5-10 years later, still nothing there, nothing documented, no source of value that came out of that project. But even thinking of it largely for the whole organization, you had IT thinking just for IT, wastewater thinking mainly this is fit for wastewater. But as we move forward in this kind of one water mindset, but also thinking how is the organization as a whole looking at this as best benefit, we needed to kind of put this together. So we moved from being that opportunistic, independent, siloed type of mentality to saying, well, let's be much more intentional and strategic. Let's work as a cohesive team and let's build something that we can, really track down, make sure we're putting in the right investments and making sure that we're getting the value that we need. Well, the first step to do that is to learn from others. And I give a lot of credit to Pam here because when I first joined, I saw that we were doing research, figured that there's a gap here that we can address. And her first advice was go out and talk to as many people that have this as you can. And we oftentimes think that research within utilities is something that's not very common. what it is. We did over 50 interviews, what we call informational interviews with utilities all across North America. And I did another 10 for utilities outside internationally in Singapore and Germany that are very proactive in having research into these organizations. And we'll touch a little bit of some of these later, but we asked them multiple questions. What is your research mission? Why do you do research? How did you start research? How did you staff it? How much funding do you put into it? Really, at the end of the day, why will you continue this into the future? Is there an endpoint at points? How do you know when to stop one project? How do you know when to invest in another project? How do you show the value of research? How do you document your lessons learned? Anything and everything we could ask, but not just that we could ask. Each independent utility also had many lessons learned that they were willing to share. And one great thing I love about the research mentality, and I would call it the group within the national level, is everyone's really wanting to work together and willing to share that information, which again, we'll touch. So then in 2020, we said, well, we learned an abundant amount of information now. How can we build on this? How can we actually utilize it? And the first step was, okay, well, now we can build a structure that fits us. So we learned what was a successful structure or framework for research at other utilities, but how can we adapt that to fit our specific organization and our needs? And it was very apparent that Loudoun Water would have a really successful program if we developed a committee for it. And when I go back to speaking about there's independent kind of utilities that were departments within utility that were kind of silent in our research, the first barrier was to get over that and say, let's make sure that we're all working together. So part of this committee, we had Kathy Cogswell from compliance, Jessica Kender sitting with us today for water ops and trap rock and wastewater reclaim system and wastewater. And the reason why we chose those three is because it was very obvious that those three departments were the most heavily involved in research for obvious reasons. But there's also what we have as an ad-needed committee member. And so when you look at our research committee today in the organization, we have over 20 members in the research committee. But we can't advise on all 20 people every time we have a research project. So these are the main points of contact to help organize the research, appoint the right people, and lead it. Yeah, go ahead.
Find that the other utilities was set up the same way?
It was all independent. It was all dependent on which utility had their own
So they're
structure.
all different.
It was all very different. Yep. And so we just took that. The one common piece of advice that every single one said was you have to have a champion. You have to have a research champion, somebody who's going to have the passion to lead this, to drive this, make this their own initiative, whether that's a part of their job description or not. Somebody who's going to make sure that this is going to be organized and help run it. If you don't have that and you kind of just have people do it on their own, you're going to fall into that same trap where you're going to be siloed again.
Ad hoc doesn't work.
Ad hoc does not work. Yeah. Some are doing it successfully, but to be totally frank, and their ability to show the value of it is not as strong. So not did we only create a structure, we created a prioritization mechanism or process. So I won't go through the details of this, but essentially when a project is now identified, it goes through the entire committee. We review it, we see what the value is going to be of it, and we see what our commitment level is going to be. And then we make a decision, advise to the GMO, and the GMO hears why and why not, with the pros and cons, and then they make a decision to either support that or not and move forward. And then we also developed a project catalog, and that was tracking all of the projects that we have. I'm going to come back to this at the end. But moving forward very quickly into a leadership role, Loudoun Water was identified as building a really successful structure for research. And within 2 years of us kind of redoing our research program and building a structure and kind of being building a foundation for it, we were invited to a utility research workshop where over 26 utilities, it says 26 on there, there was actually 27, I looked. We all came together in Philadelphia. This was sponsored by the Water Research Foundation and included included the research champion for each of the utilities and maybe one or two other staff members from the utilities. But each of those champions was either a director level or a research manager level. And we came together and it was over 2 days. And we talked about 5 major areas: program structure, staffing, funding, collaboration, and prioritization. And again, this just showed the vast diversity of how structures are built and the uniqueness of each program. But here's just, I wanted just to show you a list. This is not even all of them. And Philadelphia Water is bolded there because Philadelphia sponsored, they hosted that, but also Philadelphia was very interested in Loudoun Water's program and how we structured ours. And they decided to come visit about 6 months later, and we hosted them, we showed them our program, and then they shared a lot about their program. And so there's a lot of collaboration built from this workshop. And I'll show you in a bit that now we've got over 40 that are involved in this group.
Am I missing Fairfax Water?
Fairfax Water did not choose to join. They were invited, they chose not to
Our
join.
largest vendor.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Go back. And so we joined that workshop. We learned a lot from the other utilities. And then we were asked by those utilities if we would be a case study for utilizing all the lessons that were learned from that workshop, and because they knew that we were already 90% of the way through building our structure and building our program. And they heard about that. And obviously we talked to most of them through our informational interviews I spoke about, and they all asked if we would be a case study. So then we, with a separate project with the Water Research Foundation, took all the lessons learned from that workshop. And now we are documenting, it should be published very, very soon. We are documenting all of the specifics that we did for Loudoun Water. And that incorporated an internal workshop where we brought all the departments together and learned how research would be best integrated into their department, and some lessons learned from them, and then challenges that we may need to think about for the future. But that's not even the end of the story. Now that workshop has led to the formal organization of the Water Utility Research Community. And this is, again, sponsored by the Water Research Foundation. But now there is an annual meeting where 40 of the utilities that say they have some type of defined research program, but it's specific to their organization, are all going to come together once a year. And each year it's going to be hosted by a different utility. So this year in September, we'll go to Southern Nevada Water Authority and learn about their research program, see their laboratories, or teach us all the details. And that's one day learning all about SNWA. And then the second day, we'll be talking about what's the common issue that we all want to talk about for that year for the program management aspect of research. So not necessarily specific projects, but are we all having trouble finding young academic researchers to help collaborate with us? And then we'll talk about that, and then we'll share those and think of projects that go for. Yeah.
When you're using the word water, are you water and wastewater?
Yes.
Segregating.
Great. No, water and wastewater. Water, wastewater reuse, all forms, in any form. Yeah. We'll pass it down now.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so just a little bit of history on the Trap Rock, which we endearingly call the biofiltration benchmarking study. So Trap Rock came online in 2018, and a major process within the drinking water treatment process is filtration, and specifically at Trap Rock, it is what we call biofiltration, or biologically active filters. So 2018 and 19, we were just sort of gathering data and watching Trap Rock, how it operated. Bradley came to Loudoun Water and had a microbiological background. And we sort of had this conversation, like what do we know about our biofilters? We want to make sure this is such a critical process. We want to make sure that they're operating optimally. So we embarked on this biofiltration research project. So just to take a step back so you understand a little bit more about what biofiltration is, because we did meet, it helps you understand how we met all our objectives. Actually, we exceeded all of our objectives for the research study. But biofiltration is really using microbes to help purify the water. We use granular activated carbon at Trap Rock, or GAC. The microbes will grow within their communities will grow on the GAC, and that helps to purify the water. Not all biological plants use ozone, but we do use ozone in front of our biological filters. And when you add ozone before biofiltration, the ozone helps to break down the natural organic matter. So the bugs like to eat it a little bit better. So it kind of enhances the biofiltration process. And we operate with ozone, but we don't operate with ozone 24 or 365 days out of the year. We usually operate with ozone about 6 to 7 months, and then we turn ozone off for a couple of months. And so that was one of the questions that we had was, is that impacting our filters by turning on and off ozone?
I have a question.
Mhm.
Why are you turning it on and off? What,
Well, there are a couple of reasons. One is it's expensive to run, and we don't always have the demand in the water to keep ozone consumed. And so then we're adding another chemical to sort of what we call quench the ozone reaction. So in an effort to sort of save some costs, we just turn it off so we don't have to spend the money to make the ozone and then also add the chemical to sort of quench the ozone reaction.
Is the turning on and off based on season, water?
Yeah, it's usually seasonal. Usually in the winter months, we turn it off. Although we can sort of, we make those decisions based on the water quality that's coming in. But I would say generally over the last 6 years, we've turned it off for several months during the cold winter temperatures. Okay, so we had a lot of questions about how the biofilters were performing, and this biofiltration is not a new process to water treatment. There is a large body of research on biofiltration, but what there isn't is a large body of research on what happens to biofilters if you're monitoring them for a very extended period of time. And that's where the benchmarking for us really comes in. And it's really unique to us because our plant was so new that we could really get a good baseline of data on what was going on within the filters, not just operationally, because we collected a lot of operational data, but we also collected a lot of microbiological data. And one area where the drinking water industry hasn't flourished yet is understanding what those microbiological communities are within the filter and how they help, how they promote or demote the biofiltration process. So we want to make sure we're fostering a bug community that's good for treating water and stability in the distribution system and not like junk bugs. I don't know what else to call them. So that really started off our benchmarking study. And we had a lot of questions about like how we could optimize performance of the filters, how we could understand the biology a little bit more. And we were able to meet all of those objectives with our biological research. One important part of this study was that we ran this study for over, I say a year, but it was really over a year and a half. And we did this at the full scale plant. So this was a very collaborative research project. We had to we have 8 shift operators that work at Trap Rock, and we had to get buy-on from all of them because we needed them to make sure they were maintaining the filter rates the right way that we needed to enhance the study. And we needed their help with sampling. And just, we want them to understand what's going on within the treatment plant as well. So doing it full scale is very unique and requires a lot of commitment and cooperation. And I felt like we did a really great job of that with our team. We also, during the study, were able to determine that our filters were optimized, which is a great outcome. And we were able to identify a lot of operational parameters that we can use to improve the process, or if we start to see filtration sort of, start to fall off a little bit, we can adjust our operational parameters accordingly. And then also, and I'll let Bradley talk a little bit more about this, but we were able to sort of, the launching pad for this is that we collected a lot of biological, or a lot of DNA samples. So we collected influent samples that were going into the filters, the filter media, and also what was coming out of the filters. And one of the interns and one of our full-time employees that worked with us were really critical in that. And that was really a launching off point because that's the area that needs more research, is understanding what the bugs mean within the filters. So Bradley's going to talk a little bit about that and what that meant for our research project.
Thank you. All right. So talking a little bit, going backwards and building on what Jessica said is when we first started thinking about, we started building a research program, we had a structure in place, and then we started to formulate a lot of ideas and thinking about what are high priority items for us. Well, one of the major aspects was, well, how do we staff that? How do we execute it? And how do we fund it? Right. And during, I think it was 2021, we had 3 interns, and all of them expressed a very strong affinity for research and being involved and being hands-on. And 2 of them in particular were really fond of this project. One of them was a senior at West Virginia University who was looking to go on to graduate school, and another one was a senior at the University of Arizona, which is where I'm from. That's all the way in the West Coast. And she was looking for, she really wanted to work on a water utility that was progressive and research minded and looking into water initiatives. So when we kind of gave them the launching pad and built them up and said, if you guys are interested, there's a platform here where you guys can be involved, and let's see how we can help and let's see how we can go with it. Well, one of them said, well, I know I want to go to graduate school, and I think I can connect the dots with one of the research professors at the West Virginia University, and she can help you do a lot of the genome sequencing that's necessary for this project. And in return, then she could go to graduate school as that person as her advisor. And so we started conversations, and it came down to if we were to sponsor the first year of her, at the time, master's program, then the university had external funding that they could utilize to conduct the sample processing and give us the data that we needed. And so we wrote a contract, and we wrote it for 1 year, and we funded just over $45,000 to just fund 1 year of that individual's master's program. She did an absolutely fantastic job, turned that around, and because within her first year master's was offered to do a PhD that was fully funded with the university and external funding. And she wanted to commit to making sure that she did all of her research in association with Loudon Water. So through a $45,000 commitment from us, we now have 4 years of a PhD student working solely on Trap Rock. That's what this slide says, that one project. If we were to do a consultant, we did a price estimate. In fact, we did have a consultant working with us kind of an advisory level for this project. They quoted us it would be over $400,000 if they were to conduct the project themselves. By us doing it internally, we spent less than $100,000. We were able to get that staff development. We were able to hire one of those interns to come work with us full time for 2 years to execute that project. And then the other one we were able to fund to go to graduate school. And she's now helped us leveraging these networks, do the youth recruitment, but she's also helped us get laboratory access, not just at West Virginia, but other universities, Duke, Rutgers that she works with. And then as we're building on more of these collaborations and similar structures with George Mason University, Johns Hopkins, we have other similar projects where we're doing the kind of same structure. But by giving the platform to these graduate students and being able to work with their advisors, and you give 1 year of commitment, you're basically promoting them for 1 year to find out where they can get resources. She was able to, the first year in 2022, get $6,000 to support all of the laboratory consumables for the project. In 2023, she got another $5,000 to do what we talked about was 12 months, but really was about 18 months of a project. She got another $5,000 to support consumables for the additional 6 months. And then now in 2024, she received a $10,000 scholarship for American Water Works Association to build a new project, as well as she was fully funded for her entire PhD, as well as a over $100,000 stipend for her living costs, basically her salary, for another 2.5 years to complete her PhD. So these are all benefits that are on top of our original commitment that she and nobody else would have had access to without this kind of structure in place. So, going ahead.
Going fast.
Yep, sorry. So long story short, very, very fun story. Personally, I just really like seeing them grow and kind of blossom into,
Well,
yeah.
And it's neat to see PhDs
Yeah.
in this area. Because getting new people, young people interested in this is not always an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Oh, one more side story of this. She was originally not committed to the water industry. So she decided to come in as an intern just to try it. She was kind of going in the automobile industry. She came to Loudon Water. We gave her this platform. She immediately fell in love with it and said, "You've convinced me." Within 6 months, she's like, "I'm committed to water, changing. I'm going to PhD." She wasn't even going to go to graduate school. "I'm doing a PhD in water. I want to work with Loudon Water. I want to be committed with you guys." And she wants to continue working with us long term. So
All right, so for Broad Run, we've got 2 different piloting initiatives to discuss with you today. And I think to tie it back into Brad's kind of initial definition of research, and particularly when it revolves around PFAS, there is a whole body of research about developing new novel technologies to produce research. That is like a true research scale. Here at Loudon Water, right, our investment to research is what we call applied research, right? So we want to not invest on developing brand new technologies, right, but really look at optimizing what we have, very much what, Jessica was going down, and then those new technologies that have made it to scale, how does that impact us? This research is important for us, but it is often important for the entire industry because we tend to face challenges first or in a different way. And so, both of these examples that we're going to go through kind of touch on those concepts and how this research was mission critical for Loudon Water, but informative to the industry overall. And so when we talk about PFAS here, our goal at Broad Run right now with PFAS research is optimizing what we have. Broad Run already has granular activated carbon filtration. We know this is what many wastewater treatment plants are going to look towards when those PFAS limits do eventually come. So our perspective here is we want to be prepared and know what's achievable with the technology that we already have installed. So that has limited our scope in a good way. Otherwise, we could spend a lot of money going a lot of different directions on what we want to look at. So the current research that we're performing is focusing on optimizing the liquid stream, right? So what can we do to make sure that the PFAS leaving Broad Run is as low as we can possibly make it? For biosolids, we aren't really ready to move into research, but we are just making sure that we're prepared on biosolids for when the industry has some full-scale technologies that are ready to try. And so really on biosolids, we're moving forward with the full-scale implementation of a dryer facility, which is getting us prepared while we wait for those doing the really lab scale type research on what technologies might be applicable there. So
it might be me, but how does the thermal dryer relate to PFAS removal?
So all the technologies available right now that theoretically might remove PFAS from the biosolids, you have to have it very, very dried. So you couldn't take our dewatered solids and put it into any of these treatment processes. It has to be dried 98%, which takes a thermal drying facility. So it's the first step is to remove as much water as possible. And so when we came to you with our phase 3 contracts thus far in design task 1, which we will be talking more about at the CIP meeting, we have a pilot task in that, and we've already completed the first bench scale level of the pilot testing. And our goal with this bench scale testing was to say, what additives could we put in very early in the Broad Run treatment process that might help PFAS remove later downstream?
And so there are already additives available on the market that are being used for, say, groundwater remediation, where you have very high levels of PFAS, and we know they're effective. At Broad Run, we have very, very low levels of PFAS. So the question was, can these additives affect those low levels of PFAS, and how much is it going to take? We also knew that foam fractionation is a treatment process that has been very successful. So it branches maybe a little bit out of optimizing what we have, but could be done as a side stream process, again, to make our granular activated carbon more effective. So the powdered absorbents we did at a jar test level to say what results could we get essentially at what cost. And then we did send some wastewater off for foam fractionation testing. And would take a very long time to go through all the results. So we're just going to talk about actions that we've had on this, but we've informed ourselves. So we know at a bench scale level, it takes a phenomenally large dose of these chemicals to remove PFAS at those low levels, which makes sense, but we wanted to be informed for ourselves. So we know with our wastewater, for example, right now we apply 60 milligrams per liter of alum to remove phosphorus. We were in doses of 200 to 400 milligrams per liter to try to get effectiveness in this. So it's at a quantity where, we wouldn't even be able to store that much chemical anywhere on our site. So it just goes to show this is very difficult at low levels of PFAS removal, but we know our first answer as to how these might affect our downstream performance. So the next scale up is, so we did, our bench scale testing was to say, what could we do ahead of our granular activated carbon? Now we've moved on, and in 2024, we did the first scale of what can we do to the granular activated carbon process. And this was opportunistic, but in a really great way. As Brad said, we had our plan. We knew what phases of PFAS testing we needed to do, but HDR came to us because they have an interest in knowing how do we get those small tubes here on the wall. These are called rapid small scale columns. So that little tube is full of granular activated carbon, and it is simulating the carbon reactors that you saw in our UV building, right? That are 20 feet tall. So HDR had an interest in saying, there's a scale up problem. The results you get at something this size doesn't really match the full scale results you got, but we have full scale carbon right now that is removing some PFAS. So they said, we are very interested in running these rapid scale problems with the fellowship program that they have, if we can compare it to some of your full scale results. Another benefit at Broad Run is we have carbon of all different ages. And they're like, that is very beneficial to them so that they can see new carbon, old carbon operating. So we were able to team up and say, with their fellowship, they provided all the labor to run this pilot for us. We provided the PFAS analysis. That was our contribution part, but it saved a lot of money. And in, a month, we were able to get our first level of information. So what were we trying here? We were trying different types of carbon being ground to different sizes. We were also looking at how it changes over time. So how might it impact our full scale operation, right? If we have to replace our carbon more frequently, that is a huge impact to our operating costs. It also happens that we were having some operational issues on site with our carbon. So in an opportunistic manner, because we had this piloting coming up, we were able to say, let's add some COD analysis onto testing already done to give us information about virgin carbon versus regenerated carbon, which we currently use on site. So it just goes to show the benefit of having an ongoing research program is as new questions pop up, you can very easily apply it to a program that you've already got going on. And similar to the TRAP lessons, our Broad Run plant engineer was also able to be on site and learn how to run rapid small scale columns and piloting is always challenging, and we did have some troubleshooting issues. So he got that experience along with the HDR staff of how do you troubleshoot a small scale column. And we are still in the process of getting our data back. We don't have the full PFAS results. But as we go through that analysis, then we'll really look at how did this small scale differ from our large scale, so that in the future we can build confidence and say, let's come back and do small scale more, because you can do this so quickly, right? We could get through the entire life of carbon on site takes 5 years. We did this in a month, right? And the cost of changing out carbon at the full scale, right, is close to $500,000 versus just buying one new tube of carbon, which they give us those for free, to quickly see what differences might be. But because there's that challenge from this rapid small scale to full scale, it's important for PFAS that we go to the pilot scale. So what pilot scale is going to look like, and this is what we will be doing in the next 2 years, is much bigger columns. It's hard to tell in these, but these are examples. These aren't ours because we haven't purchased them yet, but these will be 16 feet tall. So we've got the height now, which is really important to get the scalability of the results, but again, in a much smaller carbon. And what we're focused on here is how can different materials benefit us? And then what is it going to mean long-term operationally? How often are we going to have to change this carbon? Because broad run, similar to trap, we can run our carbon as absorptive, but we keep that older carbon on hand right now because we are getting biotreatment. That's like free treatment. So once the absorptive capacity of that carbon is expended, if the biology could remove some, we got that money with that treatment without having to buy more carbon. So we want to balance the absorptive capability of this with how long we can keep it and get that bio growth. But once we purchase this column set, we are making sure that it has the controls to work in biofiltration. So even at TRAP in the future, if questions come up about how can we intensify that process, this pilot skid that we can purchase for a broad run can be used out there as well. So again, from the program, making sure that we didn't just buy this just straight for PFAS absorptive testing. Let's go ahead and get it so that it can work multiple ways within Loudoun Water. And so by completing this over the next 2 years, we really want to know what is achievable with the infrastructure that we have. And as we look at the later packages of phase 3, we'll be able to make decisions on our granular activated carbon. Do we need to build more in that last package? Is what we have sufficient? So we'll be prepared in time to make those capital decisions.
What happens to the granulated activated carbon? Do you regenerate it? Do you send it someplace?
So we buy from Calgon Carbon and they take it back and regenerate it. That is the process that's being used to date. As Calgon begins to run into issues with how to dispose of that carbon, that may change. We are writing that experience along with the industry right now, but what they do is they do keep the carbon segregated. So Broad Run, though we're a wastewater treatment plant, the water going through that carbon has already been treated, right? So it's a little bit like water filtration at that point at the end of our plant. So they give us water treatment carbon instead of wastewater carbon. So they're not mixing the dirty wastewater carbon with the carbon we have. So what it may end up is they have to specialize their regenerated carbon even more and say, well, you're TRAP and you're like a no PFAS facility. So we're going to give you the no PFAS carbon pile where Broad Run is a PFAS, but that's where we really wanted to get to that rapid scale testing in this testing, because we may need to move to virgin carbon. So it's never been regenerated. That is going to be much more expensive and it uses a lot more resources, right? So that's a problem for Calgon. They need to know if a big facility like Broad Run is going to switch to virgin, they're going to have to make sure more virgin is available for us on our schedule because they're used to us in the regenerated pile. But it's also phenomenally complicated because we're wastewater, our COD can be a little bit bigger. So there's a concern that virgin, while it might remove PFAS better, won't remove our complex organics as well. So that's why we threw those additional analysis on the rapid small scale to make sure that carbon would version would meet our initial goals, and we hadn't shot ourselves in the foot by trying to focus on PFAS, and now we can't meet another form of our effluent permit.
Is there an unlimited life on this carbon? Eventually it's used. You can only regenerate it, I assume, a certain number of times.
Yes, and that is its structural integrity, right? After
Yeah.
you've regenerated it, and each time that carbon has to meet our definition of how porous is it and what size is it. So as it starts to get regenerated, it breaks down and can no longer meet our size or porosity requirements anymore. But Calgon is taking care of all of that for us. We just have to be very strict on our requirements of what we will accept.
There's not a bioprocess where we can regenerate the carbon ourselves.
There is, and UOSA does that. And that is not only a large capital cost, but a specialized function, right? Where we would have to become experts in carbon regeneration. So at this point, I think we're in the benefit of having the experts regenerate our carbon so that we're not questioning if we get performance. Did we mess up the carbon regeneration process, right? And now do we have to go and regenerate our own carbon? So I think staying in that specialized line right now, what we have considered is, do we need the ability to store more carbon on site? If stored carbon becomes difficult to obtain, we may have to say, well, we'll take carbon when it's available, even if we don't need it, and store it. So that is something that we are considering in the later phases of package 3. But one of the things that becomes a challenge at Broad Run, and I started thinking about this when you asked, are there advanced technologies we don't have? Our strict effluent limits make us have to adopt advanced technologies, but also they make it very difficult to do that because we can have impacts that other people wouldn't realize. You know, our concern with COD removal at this virgin carbon, there are only 2 or 3 wastewater treatment plants that have that type of limit. So they can put that virgin in there, no problem. But Broad Run really has to worry about additional things that others don't. So as we adopt almost any technology at this facility, it requires investment in the pilot scale to make sure we don't build something full scale and regret that decision. So piloting is at this scale very expensive. And that's the benefit of a full scale pilot, is you've already got all the infrastructure and you can run it for a longer period of time. When you have to build something, it's still 18 feet tall. This is still big. It is fully automated. It's very complex. We have to keep it running. It is an expensive level to pilot at. So we also want to make sure that we're able to do more full scale testing at Broad Run because it is more cost effective. And we've got plans for that as well. So when we come back into package 3 of phase 3, when we've built new BRBs to the north and we've got more capacity, our plan is to come back, because we actually already invested in this in the original construction of BRBs at Broad Run. We have the ability to isolate mixed liquor from BRB1. We can isolate the mixed liquor channel and the RAS channel. So these membranes and these BRBs can be sectioned off. So that is inherently built into what we have. So there is more operational efficiency that we can do on this treatment process, but it, as always, is going to risk our effluent performance. So we plan in that package to come back and make modifications to do more full-scale piloting at Broad Run, focused on operational efficiency and treatment ability. So you could say, why didn't you just build it into the new BRBs? Why are we coming back to modify existing? But those BRBs are much bigger. So when you look at taking a portion off this to pilot, you want it to be small enough that you can pilot without impacting your effluent performance. Our new BRBs are 25% bigger than these, and we would have to make a lot more investment in them to get them. So these being smaller, there's a benefit to making those the pilot train. So that is the end of the PFAS discussion, but we also wanted to cover a technology pilot that we did, which is an example of a pilot where we decided not to proceed with the technology. So it was not an unsuccessful pilot. It was actually a very successful pilot. So there is a sludge treatment process called thermal hydrolysis. And what this does is it takes the sludge before it goes to the digester and puts it under extreme heat and pressure. And similar to the story about ozone, it breaks down those organics and makes them easier to digest. So the benefits for utilities are immense. And this has actually already been proven full scale. Many utilities have already adopted it. A good example of that is WSSE. All of their sludge is going to one facility now, and they're starting up their thermal hydrolysis right now. So it is established, but there were, when we did phase 2 of Broad Run, we delayed some of the solids treatment expansion to try to determine if this could be used. If you can make that sludge more digestible, you can get a lot more treatment in one digester, which huge savings in capital costs. You guys saw how big those digesters were. They are very expensive. It also allows us to produce more biogas, which is free energy for natural gas demand and can also be sold to supplement natural gas demand. So these both capital and operational benefits were significant enough that it made sense for us to say, can this work for Loudoun Water? This was not an easy pilot to do because you actually, again, you have to segregate off the entire biological process. So we bought a thermal reactor, and we did this pilot in conjunction with Virginia Tech through an applied research program. So the funding for all of this was actually split between all of the partners of the research program. So WSSC was involved, and Arlington County was involved because they're all looking at implementing this. So we paid one portion of this pilot reactor. Those utilities paid for the other 2/3. And then we all split the time of the students who ran this. Now, these are our 3 pilot digesters. They pretty much required a full year of 7 days a week babysitting from these research students, because not only do they have all the problems of a full-scale implementation, they have more problems because, as you can see, they constructed it all themselves, right? So we constantly have gaskets failing and gas leaking, and we need to measure that gas to know. So it was an immense effort to get digesters running, make sure they're stable, introduce a thermal hydrolysis sludge, which then makes them unstable, get them stable again, because your biology has to acclimate, and then get the results that we needed. But we were looking at results that, even though people nationally had implemented this, they didn't know. People hadn't looked at what happens to the organic fraction of this matter, because when you put it under high temperature and pressure, some of it becomes non-biodegradable. It is the equivalent of the black char on a steak. I don't know if your grandparents ever told you, right? But they're always like, if you eat enough of that, it's going to make you sick, because our bodies can't break that down. This biology can't break that down either. It's not a concern for other plants that don't have a TKN limit or a low COD limit. They can pass through that non-biodegradable portion. Loudoun Water cannot. And so we completed our year-long pilot. We had the piloting ups and down of every project, and we really were very diligent in making sure we were achieving our ultimate goals. So parts of the pilot were cut off as the schedule extended. We said, you know what, that is not critical to the answers that Loudoun Water really needs to have. To keep the piloting cost in control, respect to the overall capital investment. If we built thermal hydrolysis, it'd be about a $40 million investment. And so what did our results show? So the digester HRT, we said absolutely. It allowed us to put more sludge in that digester so that we would get those capital savings. We already knew that was going to happen. We reconfirmed it, which is good. It increased our polymer demand. So you actually have to thicken the sludge a lot more before you put it in your thermal hydrolysis unit. That polymer demand is going to be unique to every utility. So we were able to see what our polymer demand was. We actually could see it relative to WSSC and Arlington's polymer demand, which was also interesting in doing a group pilot, but it was a lot for our sludge. So we could see how much that cost was, so that we weren't blindly saying, oh, the benefits of this are good, and then realizing we're going to spend like $1 million in polymer. So one of the things that I hadn't talked about is thermal hydrolysis does produce a class A or exceptional quality biosolid. So it did improve our final product and reduced the quantity of final product that we would produce. That benefit was observed. We knew we would. But everybody knew there was a side stream nutrient load that was returned because you've broken down that organic. So more nitrogen and more phosphorus can come back. What they had not tested for is how much of that is biodegradable. And that is a really tough test to run. So we spent a lot of time once we had what that recycle stream was, trying to get it to break down. So we would put it in a small reactor like our BRBs and set it there for 10 days to see how much was left. And what we found is so much of the effluent nutrient coming back, which we had expected. It's why we were always nervous about how much nitrogen would come back, would be a problem for our permit. What surprised the industry is the COD was so high. Nobody had realized that so much of the COD was non-biodegradable, we would violate our COD permit as well. So literally, as soon as we had these results, we were being asked to present them before we even had final reports because everybody wanted to see what we had gotten. But what was important was we finished this like as we were starting phase 3, the planning phase, we were getting these results in. So we finished it just in the nick of time to make the capital decisions of we can't rely on this to get more digester capacity. And it really enabled us to make that decision to go to thermal drying because we would have always been questioning, would it be more cost effective to do thermal hydrolysis rather than the thermal drying, because it would have been a better cost decision. But had we implemented it full scale, we would have suffered with effluent permit limits for a very long time at a $40 million investment. So from the information we were looking for, this was incredibly informative, but from our research program, it was also a huge learning experience. This had been started as a research concept before Brad and I both got to Loudoun Water. So we, went through this and learned a lot of lessons. One, the mission critical nature. We quickly saw that we had to take out a lot of what we were asking ourselves to keep things on budget and focus on what Loudoun Water really what needed to know. Mm-hmm.
Did Alex Renew and WSSC also have the same conclusions, or did they?
WSSC is already building theirs, right? So they were fully committed. What they're looking at is optimization, but they don't have our same effluent limits, and neither does Arlington County. Both of those utilities are still proceeding with thermal hydrolysis, and they actually bought us out of our share of the pilot unit when we were done. So they're still working with Virginia Tech to move forward on those. And
they have different discharge requirements,
exactly.
Substantially different.
Mm-hmm. And that's why, we tried to be very sensitive for Canby, the manufacturer of this. And the way we put this out, this is not a bad technology. If we could use this technology, we absolutely would. It's why we invested in this pilot. It is just not the right thing for Loudoun Water, but important information for people to see. As they see more stringent nutrient limits coming, they need to keep this in mind for their future selves. They might not be there now, but if they get a very low TP in the future, a decision they're making now to put this process in could make that much more difficult. And we did look at, it's why we had 3 digesters. Was there anything we could do to reduce that non-biodegradability? So we essentially said, since it's high temperature and pressure, making it non-biodegradable, what happens if we go with lower temperature? So we looked at how low could we go to still get the hydrolysis that we needed, but it was not enough to offset the recycle of that material. But we also had Virginia Tech staff on site for a full year, and these are students who are learning just like we were learning, and we realized very quickly that that was hard for us to support. One, we had a facility under construction, and we were trying to carve out spaces for them to be in, but the coordination that it took with their staff and our lab staff and our operations staff, it is better if on site we have Loudoun Water staff doing Loudoun Water research and finding ways different ways through the research program to get that while keeping ourselves comfortable with what we're doing on our site. We learned a lot about how many people within this organization need to know what is going on with the piloting and understanding where we're going. And that, this one, we finished this pilot just in time to make these decisions. We look at other pre-established research programs, they're well ahead of making the decision. So it really became one of the key goals, which is where we're trying to be with PFAS. How do we complete this early enough that we're prepared and not having to push this at the last minute? Because every time that digester got upset and we had to restabilize it, we lost 3 months. And we were like, what if we don't know in time, right? What if this pushes everything back? So it really supported the need for a roadmap and knowing further in advance what research we need to know for Loudoun Water, which is one of the goals that we have, is to get a detailed roadmap established so that we're not just in time on these types of challenges. But it was a huge success. We got there and we were able to make the right capital decisions for this treatment plant.
I also want to say one more thing. So just for context, that project that Kendra just talked about was the first one that we kind of jumped right into, right? It was a mission critical need right when I came to the organization, right when Kendra joined. So we jumped in and said, we got to do this. And all the lessons learned about having staff on site then allowed us to have a structure to then apply it to Trap Rock and the biofiltration project you heard about. And instead of relying on students being in, having Loudoun Water staff do it, led to a lot of growth opportunities and developmental opportunities for our operators, for our Loudoun Water staff, and really putting it all together. So it's kind of a natural organic growth type project.
One other question. I mean, what we're hearing is a massive amount of data. How do you finalize it? Do you have a series of reports? Is that what you're talking about is a massive amount of stuff.
Yeah. Not only do we make reports, we publish it as well, which I think is important, that we don't just get the data and sit on it, we share it, which forces us to come to those conclusions, right? If we just made the decision and didn't have to share it with others, you don't have to be as organized. And sometimes it does just get lost because you're rushing from this to the phase 3 and getting something built. So that desire to share also makes us formalize and really put the opinions together and make the data available to others.
And the effort of that is dependent on the project. So Virginia Tech did a lot of their experts in that, whereas internally we were not in thermal hydrolysis. So they do a lot of the data analysis, and then we kind of go back and forth with interpretations, what that means for us, how to move it forward. In regards to the Trap Rock process, I came from a background where I'm familiar with that, and the students weren't as familiar. So I do a lot of the data analysis, and sorry, Jessica's still waiting on a lot of results from me, but we can do a lot of that in-house now, right? By being able to train and being able to develop the staff, and then identifying certain staff members that have that background or are just really interested in doing it. We've had several members come up to us and say, that's really interesting. I didn't know we were doing that. How can I get involved? So they'll help us do some of the data analysis. So it is a huge, huge lift. It's kind of depending on what the question is, but we do a lot of this data analysis in-house. And I can be very honest in saying I did, when I first came, there was not a lot of data analysis on like R or Python or any of the really advanced kind of data analytics that people use nowadays in all the different industries. I came in, was the only one that knew how to do it. Now I've spread that to multiple people. So we're really learning that and getting that integrated into the organization now.
It seems like there's an infinite amount of data that you've gathered.
That's the industry as a whole, right? Utilities, how many sensors do we have gathering data every minute or second, or what do you do with that? That is another question for the research program. How can we now take these skills and apply it to our normal day-to-day operations?
Great. So you feel educated, don't you?
Well, it's, I'm in my business, I'm involved with supercomputers, so it sounds like you need some supercomputer time to do that.
There you go.
And Virginia Tech can help you.
So we're going to talk a little bit here about some of the other benefits of research, because you've clearly seen examples at Trap Rock, you're hearing examples at Broad Run, And I'm going to talk to you a bit about some work that we're doing with the region. And it's taking advantage of our unique position in the region is that we are highly dependent upon a couple of very large utilities, DC Water, Fairfax Water, but we also maintain our own treatment facilities. So we need to understand a lot. And so are very active with the Potomac Drinking Water Source Protection Partnership. And this is a voluntary collaborative that is resourced by the Interstate Commission on Potomac River Basin. Whoops, I'm advancing my slides. This is the big fat one.
Yeah.
Okay. One issue of the collaborative is PFAS because it's becoming everyone's issue. And so I'm going to use that as an example of this collaboration and cooperation with this group. Within the group, the DWISP, there are 20 years of cooperation, multi-state, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, District of Columbia. We have 15 member utilities, all of the large ones here in the DC Metro, but we also have utilities upstream. We have 2, I think, from West Virginia. So we have quite a range of utility members. Because of everything that you've heard this morning, Loudon Water was well positioned, probably the best position, frankly, to lead this PFAS project that the utilities of DWISP decided was really important to them. Other issues that have been very important to them include microplastics. You may recall a couple years ago, I think, Loudoun County Schools asked to be interviewed. Terry Allen, I think you were part of this. We were interviewed by a student about microplastics. It was so early it was so early. We were, as an industry, we were not yet set up in microplastics. The kids already knew, apparently, that microplastics was going to be a big issue, and it is. But it's going to be following PFAS. And there's other priorities that we've dealt with through the DWISP, harmful algal blooms, de-icing materials. You'll continue to hear salt and de-icing. Yeah. And then industrial discharges. There are a lot of dischargers upstream of us. And a number of these facilities, actually, when they're renewing their discharge permits, the DWISP, one of the committees of the DWISP, looks at those permits. And typically we will file comments if we would like them to have additional monitoring, water quality monitoring, for compounds that would affect our drinking water processes. So that's kind of how the DWISP plugs into research. But this project about PFAS and PFAS variability and how it moves through the watershed, and lots of questions, so many questions that the group had that relate to the environment and just, geography, seasonality, basic, different watersheds, different activities in different watersheds. And then, lots of processing the sample type of questions. And then at some point getting to the whole sources question, where is it coming from? But that really wasn't our initial concern here. It's just, we are all trying to share data. We utilities are trying to share our PFAS data, but because we don't understand all of these variabilities, it's actually very difficult for us to share some of that source data. So we decided as a group to submit a research project to the Water Research Foundation. And the group asked Loudon Water to be the principal investigator. Bradley was the most well-positioned person to serve as the principal investigator, but we have co-PIs from a couple of the other entities and pulled together a regional team of superstars, really. Johns Hopkins University is really amazing and out there in this research. Stantec has Joe Jackangelo, who happens to be a Loudoun County resident and just all around great person and an exceptional researcher that works at Stantec as well as the Johns Hopkins labs. George Mason has a new facility down on the Potomac River. Actually, it's on the Occoquan, isn't it? I think it's on the Occoquan. It's in Prince William County,
Under the reservoir,
not the reservoir,
the title.
the tidal part. And so they are actually investing, George Mason is investing a lot of money in their research talent down there. And so they have a really great researcher that we are bringing into that and helping kind of leverage the regional capabilities. And Bradley can answer any question that you have on this. But the point here really is that, again, this is an example of how Loudon Water is providing some leadership because of all the work that we've done, and the region is truly going to benefit from this. It's a tailored collaboration project, and what that means is you have to put some cash up for the Water Research Foundation to match. So the COG, Metro Washington COG, has a water fund that all of us utilities in the region, all of us, not just the few that are on the Potomac, or, you know, just not the few of us that are in this study, actually all contribute to that. And so COG put up that initial grant, Water Research Foundation matched it, and the utilities that are all participating in this, we are providing in-kind support. So that might be a variety of things, like data, data analysis. And when you wrap it all together, the value of this project, as Water Research Foundation, you know, promotes it, it's nearly $500,000. So it's quite, it's great in terms of what we're getting out of it, but it's very valuable in terms of our relationships with our utility partners in the region, our ability to share data within the region, and answer some of those questions that we have about PFAS and where it is and its variability in our source waters. Just another value.
Where do you keep talking about value? So we talk about value research. We've talked a lot about the values that are maybe less quantifiable, but at the end of the day, we still want to be able to quantify the value as well. So I talked about that project catalog we started building when we built our structure. Well, we started looking at that really when I first joined in 2018, the first question was, what research are we already doing? How are we doing it, right? Figuring out what those silos were. But with that, it took me about 2 years to really track down every single project that was being done in the organization, try to centralize it to a single location, right? And so trying to track that, but then as you're tracking it, making sure you understand what commitments you're putting into it and making sure what you're getting out of it so you can see that value. And so by putting together that catalog, it became very apparent that we can put research into 6 major buckets. The first one being water quality, and I won't go through all the types that are on there, but I put a couple titles of projects that are on there so you can kind of understand what types of projects fit in each. So we have water quality, we do water supply, operations, so it's very specific really to day-to-day and optimization, things like that. Public health, the best way I can explain this is when during COVID-19 pandemic, we were very involved in wastewater surveillance and sending samples out for tracking SARS-CoV-2 in our wastewater. So that's a public health response. Treatment, we talked a lot about treatment today. And utility management, which the best way I can explain that is kind of building a utility program. How do you manage a program? How do you build a program? How do, right? More so the management side. So this slide is one of my favorite, and I'll direct your attention really to the very bottom, and where it says over 4 years, the last 4 years, we have over 30 projects that are in the catalog. We've invested $1.5 million, and we've been able to offset costs with external funding equivalent to, that says 11.5. I looked at it last night, it's $15.2 million of external funding. So by putting in $1.5 million and having staff, having a program really created, you can not just look for external sources yourself, but a lot of this too is you have an intern, that intern wants to go work with an academic, the academic sees an opportunity, the academic knows how to address it, can go find research opportunities that we're not even able to apply for because we're not an academic institution. But they can get that funding. They can use that funding now to address our question and our need in our facility. And so it's a great collaboration because they get access to things and we get access to things that we wouldn't otherwise, right? But at the top, just to show you guys at the top next to it in parentheses is the number of projects that are currently ongoing related to that. The first dash is the Land Water contribution. That is cash dollars that we're going to spend, whether it's internally or putting it to external, that's exact cash. Land Water staff support, that's the in-kind staff salaries that were committed to those projects. And then the bottom line is the external support. So the external cash that we're getting in support to execute that project. So we are able to quantify that value, and Kendra talked a lot about we were able to identify identify data that gave us results to make decisions, and now utilizing the decisions to move forward with a roadmap. So now we have a great program put together. We have a way to quantify these things. We know what we're doing. We even have staff in place, and we have an idea of how we can continue moving this forward. And we have a process for prioritizing our projects as a committee, really as it comes and goes, and being intentional on that. But thinking about this more fully now, we want to do a roadmap where we can think out 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, so we can utilize all these resources that we now have to try to plan these years, be proactive years in advance, so we can find that external funding 3 years before you need. You can find a collaborator who can help you address these questions, or you can even identify your need for internal staff hiring to execute these projects. So really being proactive. And then I'm gonna, this is not mine, but I'm stealing it from Southern Nevada Water Authority. So to be honest, but they have their roadmap, but they also have what they call their insurance policy with research. And they are the water industry's leader in PFAS. They started testing for PFAS in their water 22 years ago. But they now have 22 years of data of PFAS through their distribution system, through their sources that they can fall back on as their insurance policy, as they're now talking to the regulators. EPA reached out to them. They will go back and forth. So they have data that over 20 years was a very, very small cost to them. And they had external sources help fund that. And they brought staff in place that now they can, when a regulation comes out of nowhere, they can fall back on that very easily. So insurance really can be, is your insurance for research when you're not expecting it, but then also having a roadmap for things that you do need to expect, you do need to anticipate. So the goal here with the roadmap is to develop individual roadmaps for each department, right? But to make sure those are not siloed like I talked about. So Trap Rock, Broad Run, the quarry, whatever they are, each asset will have its own roadmap for those 20 years, let's say. And then we'll come together and we'll say, okay, across the whole organization, well, we identified 3 major projects that all need to happen in the year 2026. That can't be the case. We can't commit that much funding, can't commit that much time. Let's now prioritize this and see how we can expand that out over long term. Can we move this project up a year, that project out a year, and be able to be much more intentional about our research? So this is our final slide for the day. We talked a lot about research, and this is just the takeaways. Pam talked a lot about the partnerships that we have. We show a lot of partnerships with Virginia Tech, Jones Mason, Johns Hopkins, Stantec, other utilities, being proactive, having that insurance, cost effective. I think we showed enough on how cost effective it is, but a lot of it I want to talk about is, again, that staff development, that knowledge, just from the start of the program to now, just being able to see the opportunities that have come and to give our staff the ability to grow professionally has been pretty awesome to watch. So thank you guys for your attention today.
Thank you very much.
I think I may have missed it, but I haven't heard much about government funding. You're talking about the universities. I haven't heard anything from EPA or.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we are involved in multiple government-sponsored programs. Many of those we were not be able to get because we're a water utility. So we work through 2 grants one from the DOE and one with the DOD that are sponsored. The funding went to the academic partners, and then they utilize our site for executing that. Yeah. So again, that's one example where we can't qualify for that funding. It has to go to a academic institution. But then also there are opportunities that we can, as we're being proactive, we can think about, right? We have that roadmap. We can say, well, we know they usually announce RFPs, release for proposals about a year in advance. And so if we already have a project that we identify as needed, and it is something that would fit underneath these RFPs, the EPA, DOD, we can now have our idea formulated and start to apply for those programs. Right now, it's kind of come and go depending on what's there. And totally honest, none of the RFPs that are out right now, we would even want to go for. We don't have the needs for those specific ones. So it's also opportunistic. What you don't want to apply for every grant, but you also have to choose which ones are going to be most beneficial for you.
So, I think there's another, excuse me, perspective as well, and that is that, you know, we made this distinction between novel research methods, as distinct from applied research. So EPA does dedicate a lot of funding to novel research and methods development. They're doing that with PFAS right now. But they actually fund a lot of applied research, but they pass that money to the Water Research Foundation. So the Water Research Foundation, I don't know how much money they get, but they get quite a nice chunk of funding annually from the EPA.
Yeah.
And then Water Research Foundation actually are better positioned, frankly, to, leverage that funding for utility, practical applied research.
What is the role of the state? BDH, DEQ, what do they do? How do they participate?
So just in general for our research program, multiple different ways. So if it's a larger national project, they are kind of participants and they watch. When it comes to the public health aspect, VDH is very involved. So they run now the entire statewide wastewater surveillance program. They ask us to submit samples weekly. We send those samples, get data back and forth. DEQ, we also have another project where we're monitoring water quality in Broad Run Creek. DEQ knows about that project. They're anticipating putting in TMDL regulations in the near future. And so they're looking at our data set to really say, well, you guys understand this, you guys have set this up, and we've got now 10 years of data, whereas any other creek does not have that much. So they've come to us and say, how'd you do the data analysis? What are you learning? And we're kind of educating the regulators and working with them as they go down that journey. So in multiple different levels.
And I wanted to emphasize, I was going to say, as the regulators have come up, that, we often talk about how we work through relationships and everything. We think about that. And that goes so far in this, the regulator, particularly, I think the Virginia ones, DEQ, VDH, they know everything. They know the things we're involved in, how much they're looking to us, I think, oftentimes. And when we get into permit issues and, all of the different regulatory, things we're doing, there's a lot of trust in information we're providing. And so all of that just goes a long way because they see what all of that going on.
Jewel, are there any online questions? Okay, no text or anything. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody. I still have a few questions that I wrote down.
Yeah.
The research is really kind of interesting and some of it is unique. Is any of it patentable, you think?
So because we're typically working with applied research, as Kendra mentioned, most of 99% of our projects are going to be technology that's already been established, that when we're seeing if it fits us. However, there are definitely projects where we're going to come across where we need to develop something to optimize it best for us. And absolutely those opportunities are there. I've gone through that process before. So yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, keep an eye on that. That's always interesting.
Yep.
Particularly if we come up with something very unique around some of these challenges. I would guess that when you need more equipment, you'll be coming to the CIP soon to discuss that.
Likely that will happen, but I will also mention if we're having a roadmap, we can anticipate some of this. The goal is to try to offset as much as we can through external funding and other collaborations.
Right.
So I personally view if we have a roadmap and we have 3 years of finding external funding, CIP is kind of last resort rather than having to just jump to it immediately. But again,
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. But I was thinking of some of the demonstration process.
yes, we're definitely,
in that phase before you go to production. Those sometimes would be costly, but as we've talked about here, it's better to test it and determine at that phase whether before you build the plant.
Yeah,
No, I
absolutely.
understand. We understand that. Yeah.
Yeah.
A test that is a no-go isn't a bad test.
Exactly.
It really is, a good thing.
Yep.
We learn that way. It seems to me that a lot of the things that we do with the DEQ and EPA ended up, we end up with tighter specs because we're better at it than other utilities. It just seems to me that, is this just, is that a true impression, or is it just kind of?
Yeah.
I think it's a bit of what Mark said. I think that, and Mr. Sultan could back me up if he chooses to. I think that some of the older utilities, like more mature, bigger,
Mhm.
been around longer, have a certain way of doing business. And because of that unique position that Loudon Water came into the water business, being reliant on others, we are like the middle child, right? We're better able to collaborate, negotiate, make friends. I don't know. I really believe that relationship building, we just call it relationship building. But I think that
Yeah.
there's a way that we command ourselves and do business with our regulators that may be different than a Fairfax Water or a DC Water. I don't know.
But there's some-
It's interesting.
I find it interesting, when I was at Fairfax, I don't think there was any research done. Zero. I don't know how it is today, but I don't remember any research being done when we were there,
Right, and that
when I was there.
brings me to the point, because of our relationship, we have different vendors, we buy water, we send effluent. We need to know what's going on with them. That's our responsibility. I guess we also work with another utility in Prince William. Is it Prince William? Yeah, to the south. So it's very important for us to be in that relationship. And I'm really glad that you had the opportunity to show us all of this. And I'm glad a number of the board members listened in and were able to, and well, I guess we'll have a recording. Will we have a recording, Jewel? Will this be recorded? So other people can be, but this has been very educational for me. And I'm just excited to see this side of the work that you and your teams are doing.
Mr. Allen has a question.
Oh, good.
I have more of a comment than a question, but just as evidence as to how far we've come in our research department, Loudon Water no longer brings me out to talk to students about research. So I think that's a good thing.
That is a good thing.
You know, I've been on the board now a number of years, and you folks never cease to amaze me. I think that this is, first of all, I think I can probably speak for the panel. The amount of preparation for this presentation must have been pretty lengthy, and I appreciate that. But you guys never cease to amaze me on how good a utility this is. I know I've said this many times, but I have to keep saying it.
Well, I think, and appreciate all the comments and I mean, it's such a great team, and this is just one example of all these different kinds of initiatives around this organization. But I think when you take a little bit of a risk and you're very proactive and you take initiative, part of what we wanted to continue to have emphasized in here is the value of what we're getting in return by doing that. And I think that's the cycle that we've been able to do. And this organization has done it for a long, long time. And that's the culture that's been built and that we always talk about, that we want to, continue that. But when you see all this, you're getting yourself out there, we're putting ourselves out there, but we're getting in return from a value standpoint and information, and the ability to set up making strategic decisions is really what it's all about.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think we only have one more thing on the agenda. Right, the next meeting. We'll work on some topics. This one is giving us some food for thought.
Yeah,
So,
one of the
we
things
wanna
we
do
like
that.
to do is kind of take, the different conversations that we've had at the retreat and over the course of the meetings, and we're kind of taking that all in, and we've got some thoughts already. But what we'll anticipate is sometime in the fall, probably kind of an October timeframe, is when we'll have another one. And it'll be some other topics like this that I think will really expose to some things that are in the background a little bit and really, very similar to this, but other topics.
Yeah,
So.
do keep us informed on any of the litigation that's
Yeah.
going on around regulation. It's kind of curious. I mean, right now it's just sitting in court, but waiting for filings. But it's kind of interesting that people are taking that kind of attack. I'm not saying I recommend that we take any of that kind of action, but it's interesting to watch.
Yeah, well, the utility kind of community is very together on it all. So, we're very connected as all the utilities are. And so there's sort of power in that,
Yeah.
and we're staying pretty close to it.
Keep us informed. So with that, and there aren't any more questions, comments, any last thoughts?
No, thank you. very
Okay,
much.
thank you. I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very, very nice. Very informative.